For this week's In Conversation, I met with resident Pops Conductor Larry Blank, who will be hosting a POPSCast this summer featuring musicians and soloists from the Pasadena POPS Summer Concert Series. I sat down with Larry to discuss his amazing career in Broadway, TV, and film, and we discuss his work with legends Stephen Sondheim, Irwin Kostol, and even Dolly Parton. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about our POPS, Pasadena POPS, and your role there. And I mean, this Saturday, was it this Saturday was supposed to start?
I believe so, yes. It was supposed to be my Music Under the Stars. Was coming up on Saturday. Music Under the Stars we do every year to kind of whet the appetite for the season. I do it with 2 to 3 pop singers, meaning theater singers and the orchestra, and pick some kind of theme. This year I was going to do Larry Blank's Big Band Broadway, which just means
that's cool.
A lot of swinging charts, and the band loves to play it. The band, the orchestra, loves to play it.
Okay, so we have to talk a little bit about Don Pippin, and he seems to be responsible for so many opportunities early on in your career. So can you talk a little bit about his influence on you and as a mentor? And
well, when I was just a kid around New York, hanging around the theaters, I met Don Pippin when I was actually 13 years old.
Wow.
He was like the big conductor on Broadway. He was very name at the time, but he ended up later on doing a Crawford chorus line. He was Marvin Hamish's #1 guy, as well as Jerry Herman and everybody else's. And I was like a fan. I was a kid hanging out, and I met him at the stage door of the Winter Garden Theater in New York, and he kind of took a liking to me and followed my career over the years. And every couple of years, I'd meet with him and play the piano for him. And finally, he recommended me for some jobs, which continues up to this day.
That's pretty amazing.
He's godfather to my children. I totally responsible for my career. His words are, "It's good to know who to blame."
But that's so rare these days, to have someone that will mentor someone they believe in to that degree.
Very early on, he recommended me to Marvin Hamlish.
Right.
Which ultimately ended up with my being with the Pasadena POPS because of Don.
Oh, wow.
Because that's where it came from.
And that first production was they're playing our song, right?
Well, actually, Don had recommended me to do one of the tours of the chorus line.
Oh, okay.
So I did that first. So I met Marvin on the chorus line, but only, superficially, because it was a tour and he wasn't as involved. Playing Our Song came along, and Marvin offered the job to Don. And Don said to me, "I have a big hit show with chorus line, and I'm not going to leave to do another musical. So, wait a second." He picked up the phone and called Marvin while I was sitting there. And the next morning, I showed up at Marvin's apartment in Park Avenue. You have to think about this. This was 1978, and Marvin Hamlish was a superstar.
Right.
I mean, he was on television, on every talk show. He was playing piano for everybody. He won the Academy Award, the Tony, and the Grammy, and the Oscar, 2 Oscars. It was ridiculous. And I walk into Marvin's apartment, and he says, "Hi, if Don says you're good, you got the job." And that was it. And I was hired at age 26 or 27 for a top Broadway musical with a script by Neil Simon, the score by Marvin Hamlish and Carol Bayer-Sager, without even doing anything.
When you returned to New York, you started working with Irwin Kostol, is that correct?
Well, I met Irwin Kostol a bit later. I established myself as a Broadway conductor with many songs. It was at the time was a giant hit in Broadway. People don't think of that now, but it was pretty huge.
Now, were you thinking about orchestrating, or how did that come about as far as?
Well, I had always been doing little dibs and dabs of orchestrating, as you do on a musical, because the orchestrator would run out of time and say, "Oh, please help me with some scene change music." And starting out in summer stock with smaller bands, I would sometimes have to adjust stuff. So I had a lot of interest in being an orchestral conductor. Then I did a few other shows after that. One, I actually came back to Los Angeles and did a Vita for about 10 months, then went back to Broadway and did a string of flops. One of them was a show called Copperfield.
Oh, I was reading about that.
And the orchestrator was Irwin Kostol. And of course, he was very well known, especially the New Yorkers. He was the music director on Gary Moore Show, and the Carol Burnett Show originally, and had done West Side Story and Academy Awards. So I was quite well versed with his reputation and credits. So I was delighted to be working. During rehearsals for this show, Copperfield, he came up to me on the stand and said, "Look, you're a great conductor. Why don't you come to Hollywood and I'll teach you how to write so you can conduct your own crap instead of this crap."
How could you say no to that?
and that was my big turnaround.
Wow. It's pretty incredible. Okay, so then cut to Jerry Herman and Mrs. Santa Claus. I want to hear these stories because they seem like...
Okay. Well, along the way, Don had asked me to conduct the tour of La Cage aux Folles. It was a humongous hit in New York. This is 1983. And he said, it's going to be playing in LA and San Francisco. You live there. There's nobody better to do it. So you've got the job. And because of his relationship with Jerry Herman, I had the job. Like I did with Marvin, there was no question. Of course, at this point, I was very well known. So Jerry was fine with that. I conducted the show in San Francisco and LA. And through Don, established a relationship with Jerry. And then Don calls me up and says, Jerry has a TV musical with Angela Lansbury called Mrs. Santa Claus. And my jaw hit the floor. So Angela Lansbury, Mrs. Santa Claus, Jerry Herman, Don Pippin, and I'm on it. Try and stop me.
You had a long run with Phantom of the Opera. Can you talk about that?
Yes, because I had done Evita, Hal Prince had recommended me as well for Phantom. So there were two of us conducting the show and alternating. And it was a pretty heavy show to conduct. Number one, it was another huge success. And the Brits had taken over theater more or less between Lord Webber and Karen McIntosh, the producer. They were really running the show, especially with Les Mis and Phantom being the two giant successes they were in Cats and Jesus Christ Superstar. So it's a new world. It was like conducting an opera just because of the amount of music. And I actually have to say, because of Hal Prince, it was something I enjoyed very much. People sometimes make light of Lord Webber, but between Evita and Phantom, I put my kids through school, so I'm not.
Oh yeah, I think he's the greatest. I never understand why people are critical. Also, try to write those melodies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It was fun to do, and I developed a very nice relationship with Michael Crawford, and I ended up being his conductor for quite a long time.
That's fantastic. What was he like to work with?
Well, Michael is brilliant. He's like a lot of performers, a bit touchy on stage and stuff like that, but never with me. He was a pleasure, and the touchiness comes from his perfectionism. But actually, great fun. I often tell this story just to show you how lighthearted he really was. We would, in concert, sing Music of the Night, and it was pin spot on him at the end of the number. Pin spot would get smaller and smaller, with his hand up in the air, help me make the music up. And diminished this little spot and close. He would kind of collapse on stage, and he was just 2 feet away from me in the darkness. And one night I just turned to him as he finished the number and the audience was applauding and said, "Is that it?" The lights came back up and he was laughing so hard that after the show he just scolded me and said, "Don't have to do that to me." Because he couldn't stop laughing.
We have to talk about the producers, and I want to talk about your contribution to that as an orchestrator. And
okay, well, the producers was happening, which was a very exciting project because a lot of us knew the movie from 1968. I remember I was a teenager when it came out, and I remember seeing the movie and being a theater buff. I thought it was the most hysterical thing I had ever seen. So the musical was happening. I had no direct involvement until one day Doug Besterman, who was the orchestrator, and a friend, called me up and said, "Larry, I am stuck. There is so much music. I need your help." And he had me fly to New York. They introduced me to the company. I knew Susan Stroman, the director choreographer. I had some familial connections with Mel Brooks because my nephew was best friends with his son.
Convenient.
Just coincidentally. Had nothing to do with my being hired. It was Doug who called me. And they introduced me to the company and handed me a stack of music and said, "Go to your room and start." And I did about 8 songs in the show, helping Doug to finish it. And I was in Chicago, when the city of Chicago, with the producers when the show was trying out. And I knew from the first band call that the show was also going to be an enormous success.
A success it was. Oh my gosh. And now when you start orchestrating a show like this, I mean, obviously someone was working on it already, so you had the prompt. How does the prompt normally come? They want a big band feel, they want this, they want that. How does that come down to the orchestrator?
Well, on producers, they had a dance arranger named Glenn Kelly, who's a brilliant guy who was also Mel Brooks' amanuensis. He was notating it for him since Mel was more of a songwriter. Mel did write the songs, and anyone who says he didn't is not telling the truth. He would sing the songs and sing the lyrics, but Glenn would refine it from put down paper. So they had worked out these routines with Susan Stroman and the performers, so I would be handed a pretty complete routine of what the number was, with chord changes in some of the figures, as was Doug, and our job was to fill it in. What was missing, but I have to honestly say there was a lot of it there. Part of the training and experience of being a theater arranger, especially in Broadway shows, is knowing when.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about your work in movies with Mark Shaman in South Park. What was that like?
Okay. Well, that was a
Speaking of orchestration.
One day my phone rings. It says, "I'm doing the South Park movie. I'd like you to do some work on it." I said, "Great." I said, "Send me the whatever." Even at that point, we were using fax machine. We could send each other audio recordings, even though the internet was young. And he said, no, you got to come over. And I said, "Really?" He said, yeah, come on over. So I went to his place, which was up in the middle of Laurel Canyon, and I called it Coyoteville to get up there. I wasn't used to that. City kid, So I go up to the house, and he said, "I want you to see something." And it was an animated stick figure thing with this song. The first name of the song was Uncle. I don't know if I can say the rest of it, but it sounds like Ducka. But my mouth dropped open, and I was laughing hysterically. He said, "I just wanted to see your reaction." So he gave me this uncle number and said, and he gave me a pretty thorough routine for the number with a lot of figures. He said, "I want you to make it sound like Mary Poppins Goes to Oklahoma." And that's what we did, and that's how that number stands. And to this day, my kids who were very young then, they don't talk about the producers, they don't talk about family, they talk about South Park. My dad did the orchestration in South Park.
Well, that must have been fun as an orchestrator.
It was.
You can't get any more fun than that.
The other fun part was, of course, the musicians playing it don't hear the words.
Right.
You know, they hear the click track. So Mark was thrilled to invite as many musicians as he could into the booth for the play. And
show them.
and turned on the lyrics. And I've never seen so many jaws drop in a recording booth, because the musicians had no idea what they were.
That's amazing. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about Sondheim and Sweeney Todd. Light subject.
Okay, Stephen Sondheim. I met Steve Sondheim when I was 17 years old as a piano player in New York. I was a New York kid, so I met everybody. Met him socially at a party. I was just a kid. And at that point, he hadn't even written Company. He had written the lyrics for Gypsy and West Side Story, but he had not really, become Stephen Sondheim as we know him now. Anyway, time passed. I was hired as a replacement assistant conductor in Crawford, so I got to meet and work with Steve. He was always a bit grumpy, but very talented, and very nice to me. I was a rehearsal pianist and assistant, and he's a theater guy. He's nice to theater people. He's nice to people he works with. He's nice to everybody, just grumpy. And time passed, and I was asked to do Sweeney Todd for Reprise in LA with Kelsey Grammer and Christine Baranski. So we did that. I think it was 3 or 4 performances at the Irwin, full orchestra. Joe Soldo contracted the orchestra. It was an excellent orchestra, and it was one of the highlights of my life because I love the music. I love the piece. It's the kind of conducting I always wanted to do. In terms of, if I was going to do a Broadway show, why not something that has some meat to it and was challenging to conduct and didn't need a drummer to carry it along.
Right.
So, and just to tell you, the very beginning of the show, da 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 da, is a couple of violi and clarinets. It's not like a brass section blowing their brains out. So it was a pleasure to do. A couple of years later, they were doing a big Sondheim retrospective celebration at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and Steve actually requested me as conductor. And I was thrilled to do it. It was Christine Baranski, once again, along with Brian Stokes Mitchell. It was only 10 performances at the Kennedy Center, and I would say it's one of the highlights of my career.
So Larry, before we go, tell me what's next for you. I mean, I know we're all locked down, but tell me about some projects, dream projects, whatever.
I did mention that for a long time I was Michael Feinstein's conductor when he was doing Pops concerts, and Michael's been very generous with me. Between Marvin Hamlish and Michael, we didn't mention that the way I came to the Pasadena Pops was through Marvin Hamlish. Marvin asked me to help him out with some arrangements, and in his very last season, when he died so unexpectedly, I actually conducted the opening of what turned out to be his last concert. And when he passed suddenly, Laura Unger asked me to fill in for him for his last concert or concerts, and put me in place as the resident Pops conductor when Michael Feinstein came as the Pops conductor. So we have plans, of course, for the Pops as soon as we can. And we're doing these wonderful podcasts and trying to get stuff out of our archives to keep us going. And it will happen. It's just a matter of time.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we can be in the same room at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I have some projects planned with Michael Feinstein in the future. I do have a big television movie coming out in November. I orchestrated and conducted Christmas on the Square, and the music is by Dolly Parton.
Wow.
I was the arranger conductor for that. It's a big Christmas movie with, yet again, Christine Baranski and Treat Williams. And I'm really looking forward to that coming out.
Yeah, me too now. Wow, that sounds incredible. Okay, last question. So is there a musical, kind of a dream musical you've always wanted to conduct but haven't? Or maybe one that you want to return to?
Isn't that funny that you say that? It's such a tough question.
I know. It's kind of a silly question, but now I want to know.
I mean, I want to know. You know, because you asked me. I did Carousel for a while. That's a show I'd love to do again. That's something I wish we could do with the orchestra, with the Pasadena Pops in concert. That would be
a concert performance?
A little dream.
That would be amazing.
So the music is great. The orchestra would love playing. It's got a lot of meat to it.
I really think Richard Rodgers was like the greatest American composer, in my opinion. I just think the world of that music.
It was amazing, and I'll tell you a quick little story, which was 1975. Yes, I was hired to be the music director pianist on Rodgers and Hart review, called Rodgers and Hart. And he came to one of the rehearsals, and I was playing the piano. And he, unfortunately, he had a laryngectomy, he had throat cancer. But he had learned esophageal speech. And he was across the room, and I finished playing the piano, and he went. And I walked across the room and said, "Mr. Rodgers," and he looked me straight in the eye, and he went, "Dick." And I said, Dick. yes. And you'll have to edit this, but he said to me, "Too f***ing fast."
Still a good
and I'll
story.
repeat that. He said, "Too effing fast."
Larry, thank you so much. You are a musical treasure. Thanks for this.